Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to summarize the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, which is one of the best-selling books on personal finance of all time. This book teaches you how to achieve financial freedom by following the principles and mindset of the rich. It is based on the author's personal experience of having two fathers, his biological father, who was poor and educated, and his friend's father, who was rich and uneducated. The book has 10 chapters and an introduction, but I'm going to focus on the main points and lessons from each chapter. If you want to read the full book, I'll leave a link in the description below. Let's get started. The first chapter is called The Rich Don't Work for Money. In this chapter, the author tells us how he learned his first lesson from his rich dad, who taught him that money is not something you work for, but something that works for you. He gives an example of how he and his friend worked for 10 cents an hour at the rich dad's store and how they realized that they were being exploited. The rich dad then showed them how to make money by buying comic books and renting them out to other kids. The lesson here is that you should not trade your time for money, but use your money to create more money. The second chapter is called Why Teach Financial Literacy. In this chapter, the author tells us how he learned his second lesson from his rich dad, who taught him that financial literacy is the ability to understand the difference between an asset and a liability. He gives an example of how the rich dad drew a simple diagram of income, expenses, assets, and liabilities, and how he explained that an asset is something that puts money in your pocket, while a liability is something that takes money out of your pocket. He also explained that most people are poor because they buy liabilities thinking they are assets. The lesson here is that you should buy assets and avoid liabilities, and know how to read financial statements. The third chapter is called Mind Your Own Business. In this chapter, the author tells us how he learned his third lesson from his rich dad, who taught him that minding your own business means taking care of your financial affairs and building your own wealth. He gives an example of how the rich dad explained that most people work for someone else's business, pay taxes to the government, and pay bills to banks and creditors. He also encouraged them to mind their own business by creating their own sources of income and investing in their own assets. The lesson here is that you should not depend on a job or a paycheck, but create your own financial security. The fourth chapter is called The History of Taxes and the Power of Corporations. In this chapter, the author tells us how he learned his fourth lesson from his rich dad, who taught him that taxes are a way of robbing the poor and middle class to benefit the rich. He gives an example of how the rich dad explained that taxes were originally created to tax the rich, but they soon found ways to avoid them by using corporations. He also showed them how corporations are legal entities that have more rights and privileges than individuals, and how they can be used to protect your assets and reduce your taxes. The lesson here is that you should learn how to use the tax laws and corporate structures to your advantage. The fifth chapter is called The Rich Invent Money. In this chapter, the author tells us how he learned his fifth lesson from his rich dad, who taught him that money is not real, but an idea that people agree upon. He gives an example of how the rich dad explained that money is created by governments and banks out of thin air, and how it loses its value over time due to inflation. He also taught them how to invent money by using their creativity and imagination to find opportunities and solve problems. The lesson here is that you should not be limited by what you see or what others tell you, but create your own reality. The sixth chapter is called Work to Learn. Don't work for money. In this chapter, the author tells us how he learned his sixth lesson from his rich dad, who taught him that working for money is not enough to become rich. He gives an example of how the rich dad explained that most people are stuck in a rat race of working hard to earn money, pay bills, and survive. He also advised them to work to learn instead of working for money, and said that they should acquire skills and knowledge that will help them become financially independent. The lesson here is that you should not be a slave to money or a job title, but a lifelong learner and a master of many skills. The seventh chapter is called Overcoming Obstacles. In this chapter, the author tells us how he learned his seventh lesson from his rich dad, who taught him that there are many obstacles that prevent people from becoming rich. He gives an example of how the rich dad explained that some of these obstacles are fear, cynicism, laziness, bad habits, arrogance, and ignorance. He also gave them some tips on how to overcome these obstacles, such as facing your fears, doing your own research, finding your passion, paying yourself first, and seeking mentors. The lesson here is that you should not let your emotions or your ego stop you from achieving your goals, but develop a positive attitude and a strong character. The 8th chapter is called Getting Started. In this chapter, the author tells us how he learned his 8th lesson from his rich dad, who taught him that getting started is the most important step to becoming rich. He gives an example of how the rich dad gave them a challenge to find a deal that would make them money without any money. He also shared with them some of the secrets of finding and making great deals, such as looking for problems, not money, using other people's money, and learning how to negotiate. The lesson here is that you should not wait for the perfect time or the perfect opportunity, but take action and learn by doing. The 9th chapter is called Still Want More. Here are some to-dos. In this chapter, the author tells us how he learned his 9th lesson from his rich dad, who taught him that there is always more to learn and more to do to become rich. He gives an example of how the rich dad gave them a list of 10 things to do to improve their financial education and situation. Some of these things are: stop doing what you're doing, look for new ideas, find someone who has done what you want to do, take classes and read books, make lots of offers, join a network of people who want what you want, act now, and have fun. The lesson here is that you should not be complacent or satisfied with what you have, but always seek new knowledge and new challenges. The 10th chapter is called Final Thoughts. In this chapter, the author tells us how he learned his 10th and final lesson from his rich dad, who taught him that becoming rich is not only about money, but also about freedom and happiness. He gives an example of how the rich dad explained that money is just a tool that can help you achieve your dreams and live your life on your own terms. He also encouraged them to use their money to help others and make a positive difference in the world. The lesson here is that you should not be greedy or selfish with your money, but generous and grateful. That's it for the summary of Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something valuable from it. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. Also, don't forget to check out the book if you want to read it in full. I'll leave a link in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.